And now we return, except in post-commentary rather than live com. This is footage from about 2-3 weeks back, but I'm done with the work that stopped me really doing a lot of editing. There's still stuff to do, but that'll be done later.
What a joy it is to behold the divine. It must be such a pleasure. You're in my debt, you know. You're nigh on a beast of the field. But here you are, treading a measure with the gods.
So you might have guessed already from the sound of his voice that this is the game's Patches. Except this Patches is a little bit different. You might notice he has rather non-humanoid looking appendages from the window there. This is what is now pretty much the infamous Spooder Pooches. But why he's a spider? Well, that might take a bit of explaining. Generally, from what I've seen of the game and how things are altered by the nightmares, I've always got the impression that Spider Patches, for reason he's not the only one of his type either, is a human being like us, probably from Mensis, considering the organisation that makes the most liberal use of nightmares. He was probably a member of Mensis who ended up being transformed into a spider-like being during his experiments with the nightmare. That's what I've come to think about in regards to how Patches is the way he is. And this is me just looking at the various things on the desk. This is a study in the research area, as you can see from all the eyeballs and chemicals everywhere. Everybody's big on their eyes in this world. And this is the preliminary area to both the Nightmare Frontier and much later on the Nightmare of Mensis, which we'll find out about later. This is some of the weird residents of the lecture hall. Ex-students that are now just sort of blobby messes for some reason. Nightmares are strange. Strange indeed. And this item here, the lecture theatre key, helps to clarify a bit more about who owns this place and what this place used to be like. The two-story lecture building is adrift in a nightmare, but once it was a place of reflection where scholars learned of history and archaeology. Considering who uses nightmares most of all, it's likely to be Mensis's lecture hall, but there is some credence to the belief that it's Birkenworth, considering the where the old Hunters expansion takes place. And here's a bit more tidbits about the origins of the Healing Church. Has its roots in Bergenworth, and naturally borrows heavily from the uniform design. It's probably a bit more evident on the next student kit we get in the next set. But yes, there's quite a direct relation between Bergenworth and the Healing Church, and that's Sony. What that is, considering it doesn't actually tell you, is I accidentally pressed the button for share. And that prompt is basically just saying to me on my side, the game recording has paused. Unfortunately, it doesn't reflect all too well on the actual recording, and it's just this big, ugly black box. So thanks very much, Sony. Thanks very much for doing that. There is something very special that I want in here, something very useful for Arcane builds, or even builds that invest so much as 20 into Arcane. I think it's 18, actually. Yeah, these guys like to hang on ceilings an awful lot, as you might have guessed. So they behave quite a bit like slimes, although they're not quite as resistant to physical damage. But the item I want is the first useful hunter tool I come across in this Let's Play. And I'll talk a bit more about it when we actually pick it up. So about the nature of the old Hunters expansion in Bergenworth, that takes place in something of a strange sort of situation. I suppose I'll go into more detail about it when I go through the DLC much later. Probably when I get back. But it's a mix of both the Hunter's Nightmare and a particular area utilised by the Healing Church, and it's not abundantly clear on whether the Healing Church section is sort of a reimagining of an existing area that was once in the real world, much like with the Hunter's Dream and quite possibly this lecture building itself. Or whether it was a place in the Nightmare constructed very specifically for what's going on there. And I say that that the lecture hall might actually be a real place because it said today it exists only in the Nightmare or something along those lines, but once it was a place where loads of people studied. And I don't imagine, while you have students here studying, and it's quite possible that people just moved into Nightmare to do it, there are, of course, examples of places that exist in the real world of Yharnam that are just reimagined in a Nightmare, just with different geometry. Such as, like, the Hunter's Nightmare, you'll see it is a reflection of the Cathedral Ward. So, the Nightmares are a very weird sort of story element to this game. And I've always been under the impression they're shaped by the hosts of the Nightmare, and that they act as the architects for the places, in some form. Which raises interesting implications for the next area we're going into, the Nightmare Frontier. Which I'll talk about a bit more in terms of its possible inspirations when we actually go in and see what it's like. But this is the Hunter tool I was talking about, and it is 18, Arcane. The initial encounter marked the start of an inquiry into the cosmos from within the old labyrinth led to... okay, I closed it. But Ebrietus is actually a very important, great one for the Healing Church, and that has some great story importance much later. But for now, we just got ourselves an incredibly useful Hunter tool. What this does is that before the patch, it just knocked people on their asses really easily and did a moderate amount of arcane damage. Now, its damage seems to be fairly solid, and it still knocks people on their ass really well, but it can also parry and backstab very easily and only costs a single bullet to use it, so now it's exceptionally good. So as you can see, that path leads nowhere, and there are these weird candles everywhere in this graveyard, much like the kind of mass grave area within which Iosefka's Clinic and the main Central Yharnam area is built upon. But here is the main structure of the Nightmare Frontier. Sort of like collapsed old buildings and rock formations and such. But if you look in the distance, which I do in a minute with this, you can see that there are other structures underneath the fog, which makes me think this whole area was quite possibly built upon, or based upon, an old civilization, which is why the Healing Church is actually exploring it. So there's not necessarily a host from the church or of Mensis actually creating this nightmare. This could be a pre-existing one that they've just discovered. Now, the significance of that is going to be extrapolated until when we actually fight the boss of this area. Or kill it, I should be more precise. That's Walker of Ebrietus in action. It's got very little starter. It's fairly fast. It's not... I'd say it's about the same speed as using the gun component of the rifle spear, which, for getting backstabs with it, is exceptionally quick, because ordinarily you have to use a charged attack, and this thing has got a lot, and I mean a lot, of range. So being able to do very quick, long-range backstabs like that is exceptionally useful. I end up using this Hunter tool more so than any other, even after I get things like the Executioner Gloves or Beast Roar, which are both quite useful. Although Executioner's Gloves is less useful now that the Black Sky Eye exists, but that's a DLC item, so I'll not talk about that too much. But I will, however, point out this interesting Shining Coins path that's rather conspicuously laid out here, and point out that we finally get to see Patches in the full. He's just chilling there, just waiting for you to come across. And even though you can't shoot him from here, it is possible to knock him off, which if you saw my Dark Souls Let's Play, you'll know I'm fairly fond of doing. They even have a nice little animation for him just hurtling down the path. Unfortunately, you think that would mean like, oh well, now he can't kick you off. Not true. It's like with Dark Souls 1, they treat it as if you'd never even touched him, and I really dislike that, because they have the animation this time for him falling off and being duped. But they still just say like, oh, he just gets up there and pushes you off. And it's like, no, I knocked him into the poison swamp. You telling me he scuttled along while I was farting around and got back up there like, right, second time's the charm. I don't know, there are a lot of cases like that with patches, it's just, ugh. It's clear with a few of the things they didn't think players would do things in certain orders, or that they would notice certain things going off, or like things that are half-assed, but this is going to be an encounter, again, it's an NPC hunter encounter where you know just how incredibly stupidly powerful hunters can be in terms of the damage output and how much health they have. The worst example has not been seen yet, but this is an example of how you can sort of cheese that. I was originally going to, like with the last example, I wanted to show off how useful a blunderbuss could be at dealing with NPC hunters, and this is a fight where I get to do that. Want to actually switch to it, because I've still used the hunting pistol here, and make a quick change around. It's also an example of how Org of Ebrietas works in the middle of like the heat of combat. With a little bit of interesting application, it really works wonders. This is a 2v1 normally, and I say normally because, well, you can probably guess what I'm going to do with this guy. There's a rather conspicuous ledge, and I have an ability to knock people on their asses for miles. So he didn't last very long. Now this guy makes the poor mistake of getting stuck into a corner. And this is where the strategy of the blunderbuss and Augur of Ebrietas really works. And it is because both stagger really well, and they take no stamina to use. So it's very easy, more so with the Hunter's Blunderbuss than the Ludwig's Rifle, to just R1 spam something to death, and then while you're waiting for your stamina to regen, hitting them over and over again with either a Blunderbuss or Augur of Ebrietas. And he just didn't stand a chance as soon as he was in the corner. As you might have guessed, this is my preferred strategy for dealing with most NPC hunters that have stupid amounts of health. And this isn't the last time I do it. Oh, no. I really am not... I can understand why they gave the NPC hunters so much health and made them such enormous tanks. But at the same time, it's a really... It's kind of, again, a half-assed way of trying to compensate for them not being as unpredictable and versatile as the player character can be. I've seen some of the NPCs AI in Dark Souls 3, and it seems like they did a much better job in that, because it seems like they've looked at what players do when they fight other players and sort of incorporated that into enemy design. So more use of parries, liberal use of hyper armor, and just generally just trying to be a bit more unpredictable. And it seems it does seem to be quite interesting from what I've seen. So props to them for that at least. It's just that Dark Souls 3 is still very much fan service Souls right now. I don't know with that one. This is an area that you don't really want to stick around too much in, or if you do want to go around and loot everything and get everything from the Not Crystal Lizards, you're going to have to want to very quickly deal with the big giant guys there, because especially with the character with as low vitality as I had at this point, they can very easily one-shot you. It's kind of annoying, especially with the lingering hitboxes of the boulders, but they're not impossible to deal with. It's just, like with a lot of enemies here, it's just a matter of getting used to them and just sort of adapting to how they behave. And here, if you're wondering why I'm sitting down for a minute, I received a message that I was addressing. But that's an area that I think gives you access to a few other bits of bloodstone shards, which I really don't need at this point, because it's just so easy to get bloodstone shards. Like, at the point I'm at, I can easily just buy them, if I really want them. It's not that big of a deal anymore, so it does make me think they really wanted you to go through this area and be like, oh my god, it's so hard and horrible, like when you're using like a +3 weapon or whatever, or something along those lines. Because you get an awful lot of standard bloodstone shards for some reason. And this is another demonstration here of just how good Augur of Abriatus is. I, spoiler alert, cock up this charged R2 and back away, but even at the distance I backed away and fired, it still hits him and still knocks him away. It's just so broken. And that leads to a very, very useful rune. This is the rank 2 clockwise metamorphosis rune, which boosts my health, which is very, very useful. It's always good to have more health. And then we see the whole charade with Spooder Pooches. This way to witness a miracle. The miracle of being shoved flat on your face.
The gift of the Godhead cometh!
So now we're in the lovely Blighttown area of this place. And thankfully, poison is not like Dark Souls 2, where you get it and like 10 seconds later you're dead, because it just ticks like crazy. You can generally just ignore poison as long as you're not at low health. Though to be honest, in this next bit, I'm amazed I didn't die, because my health just gets so very low fighting these very bizarre creatures. And I don't get a chance to get a proper look at them, but there's actually messengers inside these things. It's strange, and it does make me wonder what these enemies are supposed to be like. Are these like sort of where messengers grow? I'm not too sure. It's very weird. The purpose of the messengers as well is very strange. They're just there to sort of connect you to lanterns and trade things from realms to you and so on. But there's also a lot of statues within Yharnam, and I think Yahar'gul especially, that actually depict the messengers. Which is interesting because it then emphasises that the people who designed the areas and the people who are running the healing church were aware of the messengers' existence, which helps to date the length of the hunter's dream to an extent. I suppose in a timeline sense, from what I've played of the DLC and piecing that together, the hunter's nightmare scenario basically just got rid of the whole all hunters who are 10 a penny coming from like standard Yharnamites, although you still get a lot of that from time to time. It's just, it's not the only source of where hunters come from. I think very much the purpose of the hunter's dream, because we know already that Lawrence beckoned the pale moon, which sustains the dream. That's what the court said. So it's quite likely that he did this to find a way to replace the hunters who are lost in the hunter's nightmare and sustain their presence so that they don't necessarily get trapped in nightmare realms like this one. This is why we're able to get out of nightmare areas we would otherwise be stuck in, because we could just access the lanterns and go back to the hunter's dream where we're actually sustained. But aside from that, I'm going to make a point about this horrible, nasty enemy, which I deal with relatively easily here, but that's because I'm being exceptionally careful and waiting to get my backstab. These things are incredibly nasty because they... First off, they have a grab. That's really, really harsh. But that wouldn't nearly be as bad if it weren't for the frenzy tick they have. Which, as you'll see when I fight this thing again, ticks even if they so much as look at you. If they so much as look at you, they'll hit you. And this was not one of my finest deaths. Not by a long shot. So now this thing's got my soul, so I have to deal with it again if I want them back. Or blood echoes. But you'll see very quickly just how nasty Frenzy can be with just one enemy. Thankfully these things can be quite easily stunned by Augur and the second form of Ludwig's Holy Blade, but still, that's what Frenzy does when it ticks. It takes off about 70 to 80% of your health in one go. So if you're not at full health, you are very likely just going to get immediately one-shot. And again, even once you've dealt with the source of Frenzy, it can still climb up. So Frenzy is the nastiest thing you can experience in the game in terms of, like, on a damage basis. So when you're selecting your armors, it doesn't really matter too much what the defense is, so long as your frenzy resistance is generally good. And this is another reason why the insight mechanic is... I haven't really talked too much about the insight mechanic and how it affects things like your resistances, but it's generally counterintuitive to run around with lots of insight. First off, it limits the amount of beasthood you have, and by extension that means you can't build up beasthood to the point where you're doing stupid amounts of damage. And it also has a detrimental effect on your frenzy resist the more you have. So unless you're saving up for something in the insight shop, or you want to experience some of the interesting differences, of which there's only a few when you run around with high insight, it's generally a good idea to just dump all your insight into consumable items. That's pretty much all it's really good for. So that's all of the Nightmare Frontier pretty much cleared. And when I come back after spending these blood echoes, it's on to the boss. Now the boss in this area is not too bad, but there's a defiled version of it in the Chalice dungeons. And the defiled Chalice dungeons essentially just limit your HP by half, while also having monsters that are basically just at endgame level of difficulty. It's real bullshit, to be honest, but the defiled version of this boss in those Chalice dungeons emphasized to me just how irritating some of its windscreen wiper moves are, and just how the boss isn't really... Like, my favourite boss fights in Bloodborne are the boss fights that involve you fighting hunters, or human enemies, because they often follow the same rule sets that you do, and there's less bullshit in the way. Enemies like the bosses like the one we're about to fight, or ones like Cleribeast or Parl that take up like all of the screen, I really dislike, because often their movesets are very like spammy, sweepy, and is generally just tank and spank for the most part, or just back the hell off until they're done. It's really kind of lazy, but I know why they did it. Yeah, because of how people just completely trivialize bosses by staying on their backside in Dark Souls 1 and 2. And this is the boss! Complete with anime lasers and weird limbs and all. And the reason I'm using Bone Mirage here is because it's fucking brilliant against this boss. It takes extra damage to its head. Using Bone Mirage Hunter Pistol allows you to keep your distance. Repeating Pistol is even better if you don't mind the bullet usage. And in this first stage, it basically stops you taking unnecessary amounts of damage from its stupid flailing. And of course allows you to visceral attack like this. You'll see even with a weapon like Ludwig's Holy Blade and its great L2, as much as I get hits in, it's very easy to miss, and if you have something like the Blades of Mercy or like the Thread of Cain, hitting this boss in the head is a fucking chore. Now, I don't have much trouble with this boss, I'll be frank, in this form. But try to imagine this with the ability to 2-3 shot you, and it has about like, I don't know, what was it, like 6,000, 8,000 health or something like that. A really tedious amount of health to go through. And that's the fight that demonstrated to me that it's like fighting Vendrick over and over again, where it's just a really tanky boss with really big sweepy moves, and it's really not that interesting or fun. Once it gets to this stage, you don't really have to bother with the Hunter Pistol strats as I've been using, because you can just do this. Some people might have a lot of trouble with this boss because, again, sweepy movesets, more AoEs and so on, steppy somps and whatever. But if you stay this close and just attack the arms or the head, as long as you stay close to the feet, you only have to worry about avoiding the stomps. And this. And I found the best way of dealing with that is just to walk towards behind where Amygdala was. And most of the time if you do that, you not only avoid being stomped on, you're also in a prime position to just hit Amygdala in his stupid face. Like so. But if you don't want to risk it too much, you can just stay to the sides and whack at the arms. That's generally also a very safe way of dealing with this boss. And that was that. Prey slaughtered indeed. And we get the Ailing Lauren Chalice. I haven't been messing around with Chalice dungeons too much. I think I'll do that later when this character's at N tier level. But this is something that makes me think that this whole area is based on the original tragic land of Lauren that fell to the scourge of beasts like Fumeru and Yharnam before it. So that's more or less it. Next set will be continuing with main game progression to explore the Forbidden Woods, which is an enormous, enormous area. So I will see you then.
Oh, Lawrence, what's taking you so long? I've grown too old for this. Of little use now.